Hey, how's it going, everyone? Thank you for joining me on a new episode of the Music Review Podcast. My name's Josh, and thanks for joining me on this album review. This is going to be episode 46 of the album review series. The name of the album is titled The Last Exit by the band Still Corners. And yeah, this album was released on January 22nd, 2021 of this year. Kind of like a low-key release by the band. Didn't really see too much hype around the release. I will admittedly say, though, I'm not a huge avid listener or follower of the band, but I have casually listened to them for the past few years. So when I saw that they released an album this early into 2021, it caught my attention. And interestingly enough, this album really not getting too much attention in terms of press. I looked, and then I don't even think Pitchfork has reviewed it. Not to say that it's this entire album hinges on something Pitchfork says, but just to paint a better picture of where this album stands in general. Even Morgan Wallen got a review, but that's beyond the point. I'm not trying to make a huge deal about them not getting a review on a certain site. Just saying this album seems like it should be a bigger deal. But nonetheless, if you're not familiar with this band, they are a UK kind of indie pop, dream pop outfit that kind of goes along the lines of some dream house or beach house stuff, but not really beach house. They kind of have more of their unique style. But anyways, before we get into this review, I just want to let everyone know there is a new episode of Best and Worst Track of the Week for the week of February 6th that just dropped last weekend-ish. If you want to check that review or that episode out, covered some tracks by 21 Savage, Billie Eilish, and Rosalia, that collab track. Love that track. Also Sabrina Carpenter, that kind of other half of the Driver's License song, and some reggaeton from Anuel AA and Ozuna. Best and Worst Track of the Week for this week will be dropping shortly as well. But yeah, let's go ahead and get into the gist of this review. Like I was saying earlier, Still Corners are an American / British dream pop band formed in 2007. When I say American, one half of the band, the singer-songwriter-producer Greg Hughes, grew up in the United States, specifically Arizona and Texas, from what I read. But later he relocated to the UK. The other half of the band being Tessa Murray, who is a vocalist that I believe is just from the UK. And like I was saying earlier, Hughes later moved on to the UK to pursue music. I guess he's a talented producer. For whatever reason, UK was his calling. That led to him meeting Murray by chance at a train stop, something like that. I read on Wikipedia. And they later formed a band, which is Still Corners. Their debut EP premiered June 13, 2008, titled Remember Pepper, which was later followed by a single Don't Fall in Love, which was released August 30th in 2010. The single was actually my introduction to the band, probably sometime around 2017, 2018, which came about by me randomly listening to personalized Spotify radios one day that was primarily loaded with dream pop bands like Wild Nothing and Dive, and kind of ashamed to see that it took me that long to catch on to this band. If that Don't Fall in Love was released in 2010, now granted in 2010 I was probably a sophomore in high school, and I was just into Drake and rap and weird shit. Didn't really have an expansive taste, but figured I would have picked up on them sometime later on, in 2013 or 14. But anyways, around 2011, the band earned a signing to Sub Pop Records, and their debut album, Creatures of an Hour, was followed by the signing. think that debut got some critical acclaim, and sometime in 2016, the band ended up forming their own label titled Wrecking Light Records and started self-releasing their own albums. Obviously now the Last Exit is on that record label, and I will say, interesting enough, I know I brought the Pitchfork thing up earlier. They haven't had an album review on that site since 2013, so I don't know what happened. There's some bad blood since that debut album. Still Corners just seems like a band that would be regularly covered from that sort of side of things, the indie blogosphere, which respectively some other outlets might be covering them. I'm just surprised they're not a sort of more prominent act, because they really do make nice music for the most part. They definitely have their own aesthetic centered around like syncopated guitar riffs, and like, colorful synth work and haunting vocals from the vocalist Murray. But anyways, their most recent album prior to The Last Exit was Slow Air, which was released in 2018. And also we find on that album there was maybe some light or slight Lana Del Rey influence on tracks like The Middle. But who knows, maybe Lana was listening to Still Corners around 2009 or 2010. And then also on that album, Dreamlands had nice qualities with haunting vocal interludes and like the early Coldplay-like subtle guitar work that I found was pretty cool. And the album seemed to be exactly what you'd expect from a band like Still Corners. So this is, again, their previous album, which their music really leans a lot on subtleties and keeping a certain level of subdued energy in their music. And I found on the last track, Long Goodbyes, was probably one of the better parts on the album. It opens up with a really pretty and colorful synthy instrumental introduction that kind of just simmers throughout the remainder of the track. Just thought that was another highlight. Yeah, but in terms of comparison between Slow Air and The Last Exit, I'm not really feeling much has changed for the band in terms of like what they're putting out, or if there's a different direction. The Last Exit very much feels like they're sticking to their bread and butter. This band definitely sticks to a certain, for lack of a better word, style that works for them really well. But anytime the band deviates at some point from that said style, you can either get a track that's a little lukewarm or really great, like those highlights that I pointed out on Slow Air. But I will say on The Last Exit, when they deviate from their typical bread and butter sound, those tracks can sometimes feel like it just didn't quite hit the mark, or they're just a little too odd for being working in the context of the album, in comparison to like their typical syncopated guitar progression sound with like some trancey or vibey slow burner aesthetics going on with the haunting vocals. There's not many moments on the album when I find when they deviate, it really works out too much. But when it does happen, there are some really great moments on the album. But I'll start with The Last Exit, the opening track. Didn't quite find this track to be a highlight. There's immediately on this track a sort of an Americana Western aesthetic to this, especially with the opening guitar material, and you kind of get that sort of like Western-ish, I guess, color or aesthetic thrown in at other moments on the album. I'm not sure if I dig on this track and the instrumental interlude that features a really piercing piano melody that's guiding everything. But the track does have some subtle elements that are presented, that are typically presented in the Still Corners music, so I really wouldn't count this track as deviating too much. The next track I did find to be a highlight, though, titled Crying. The track is immediately more colorful than the previous, and I love the uncomfortable sounding whistle sample that's thrown in all throughout this track. Love the electronic elements that are presented, the muddy and crunchy synths that give the track a nice character. Some piercing piano melodies that are a bit more tastefully used as opposed to the previous track. Also, this track kind of just has a floating like nature to it. It just kind of feels like it's just hovering, and some lush acoustic guitar presented as well that kind of shows up a lot on this album too. That gives the track a lot more energy as soon as it enters, and it gives the track a lot more prominence as well. The track can be a little stale once we get to this instrumental interlude that really doesn't present much more. The track just kind of simmers at this point, but doesn't really build up too much either. So thought this was a better track than the opener though. I will say things get better on the next track, White Sands. Immediately, I like the bright synth ostinato melody that greets you. It really gives the track an upbeat and catchy nature as well. This is the most poppy track thus far. I will say this might be a slight deviation to their typical sound, and it works here. There's a nice buried and bouncy synth ostinato melody that's slightly different than the introduction one, or the introductory one on the verses, that really provides a nice driving force on the track as well. It kind of adding more to that subtle nature that they really thrive on. Also, this track kind of reminded me a bit of like a War on Drugs track, especially on like the more guitar centric moments, on like instrumental breakdowns, and I just really like the haunting nature that Murray provides here all throughout this track, and thus far I think this is the best track. I will say Till We Meet Again didn't really hit, or didn't find it to be a highlight. It's definitely a slow burner. I will say this is a deviation that doesn't really work. Kind of reminds me of like Hey You by Pink Floyd a bit. And I'm not sure I like how the track progresses into like this jam with a driving eighth note feel with a buried guitar solo that's supposed to maybe feel like it's the climax of the track. I don't really think it gets there though. Also some cheap sounding synths that are thrown in that I really think were a bit unnecessary, and this track really just feels a bit different from the rest of the album, and not in a good way. A Kiss Before Dying though, I will say, is a nice return to form. A highlight I found. I love the murky electric guitar bits coming in and out of like the vocal stanzas, and the track definitely features a typical Still Corner style, and I love the pace of the track as well. There's some nice swelling synth tones that appear at times that sound like harmonicas, and it's a bit of a shorter track, but I kind of wish it was developed a bit longer, but I do like a lot of the track. Next track, Bad Town, wasn't too sold on it either. I will say this is the part of the album where it feels like this track is making everything feel like it started to lose a bit of momentum. There is an interesting moment here that features like a classical guitar passage that is accompanied by like this timpani. I think that's what it sounds like, but I don't think it mixes too well. It is interesting, but the resonance of that timpani sound kind of just makes it sound a bit muddy, and it clogs a lot of the mix up. But I will say that's like a deviation that kind of didn't really work too well. But Mystery Road was a really cool track, the next track that I found to be a highlight. We get some more straightforward indie pop sounding material, and I love the transition that goes on here to the chorus. The track has a lovely driving nature and some energy that we get from the drums at this point in the track. The acoustic guitars here just sound as lush as any point on the album. It really works here, and it really fills out the track quite nicely. Also, I dig the chirpy muted guitar in the bridge as well. It's a nice moment on that track, and overall the track's pretty cool. It also features like some grit and attitude to it as well that I think is a bit hard to come by at times on the album. The next track, Static, I will say this is a bit of a middle-of-the-road track. Not too bad, but not necessarily providing much else. The track just kind of resembles a lot of the other songs we have gotten thus far. It really just doesn't stick out as a highlight, in my opinion. There are some nice, tasteful piano chords thrown in at times on the track to switch it up. but it's really centered around a typical Still Corners aesthetic. And I will say though, after this, the album does pick up a little bit on It's Voodoo, probably one of the better tracks on this album. Immediately get a more upbeat and groovy rock jam here. The track features some nice muted guitar riffs that really embellish the track, and there's also a fun and energetic bass groove that really holds everything down. Maybe some psych flavor on this track as well, and the track really just accomplishes having this trancey vibe to it where you can get really lost in the overall groove. And I could see this being a direction the band builds on. Like, I would really like to see a Still Corners album with a lot more of this stuff featured. And also I love that introduction of the keyboard melody towards the end of the jam section. It's a really good track. The next track is Shifting Dunes. I thought this was a cool track too. I love the choppy drum style track on here. The driving eighth note guitar and bass lines that are really great on this track, and there's some soaring reverb soaked guitar lines that are great as well. This track is probably one of the more classic dream pop style tracks. It really feels more of like a underdeveloped jam, but here it really works and I dig it. Maybe some light dive influence here as well. And then we find ourselves at the end of the album with Old Arcade. This was an interesting track. It deviates a bit, but it does work, I'll say. I like the warbled effect on here. That's almost Mac DeMarco-like stylistically. The ambient and swelling synths that coat the choruses are nice as well, and it's a pretty straightforward track though. It's definitely not the best stuff presented on the album, but it's definitely not the worst, and it's not a bad way to end it. I kind of liked it as the ending track on here. And yeah, pretty interesting album. I will say before kind of going into this review, I really wasn't too versed on a lot of the music of Still Corners. I'm still not, but I think I overall did enjoy the album as a whole. I will say maybe I enjoyed it about as much as the previous album, or maybe a little bit more. Some really nice highlights like It's Voodoo that I really would like to see the band go down that road more. And then also White Stands was a really nice synthy poppy track as well. And there's just other ones though, they really stuck to their bread and butter. It really worked out, especially when we hear like a lot of that lush acoustic guitar. So yeah, this is a pretty good album overall. I really will say that it's a shame this band and this album isn't really getting much more attention. And won't necessarily say it deserves like a lot more praise. But at least attention, like more people talking about this band. Yeah, I will give this album a 6 out of 10. If you're a fan of Still Corners, you probably will find something to like out of this album. It might not be your favorite Still Corners album though. If you just like indie pop, indie rock, dream pop in general, this might work for you, it might not. But I don't know, this might be a really niche sound for some casual rock or indie rock listeners. But yeah, hopefully I'm still interested in what this band can put out. So hopefully Still Corners puts out some more projects or music out in the future. Would definitely be interested in seeing them if COVID wasn't a thing. But yeah, if you stuck to me to the end of this review, thanks for listening. My name's Josh. I'm a music reviewer. Make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube if you're digging the podcast. If not, leave some feedback, good or bad. Also subscribe on your preferred streaming service. But yeah, I'll be covering some more music soon. Foo Fighters is probably next, but we'll see. But take care of yourselves. I'll see y'all later.